All right, hello everybody. My name is Alex Lang and welcome to Upstream's webinar on data access. We wanted to take a moment and reintroduce ourselves and talk a little bit more about the changes that we've made with Upstream since our transition from RPR to CoreLogic. We have the following people on the phone. Again, my name is Alex Lang. I'm the CEO of Upstream. I've been doing this project for just about 3 years now. I formerly was the managing partner for Second Century Ventures, the venture arm of NAR, and prior to that, I was the CTO of Market Leader, which was acquired by Trulia, and prior to that, I was the founder of Roost. Also on the call today, we have Kim Mellick. Kim works with me here at Upstream. She'll be helping moderating the chat questions. We have Amy Gorse. She's from CoreLogic, formerly of Clarity Consulting, and I'm gonna let her give her a minute to introduce herself. And of course, we have Victor Lund from RE Technology. So Amy?
Thanks, Alex. Yep, I'm Amy Gorse with CoreLogic. I lead business development, also the executive product leader of a product called Trestle that we used as the basis for Upstream. We'll get into a few more details on that in the call. CoreLogic, if for those of you who don't know who CoreLogic is a data and analytics company that provides financial, property, and consumer information and insights to the industry. I work in the real estate solutions group, so products you might be familiar with, such as Matrix, Trestle, and Realist property records, and AVMs. I wanted to just, as part of this introduction, discuss the role CoreLogic plays in Upstream, because I think there's been a little bit confusion in the marketplace. CoreLogic is the vendor for Upstream. So we have a vendor relationship with Upstream, much like we have vendor relationships with MLSs and technology providers today. So Alex and his team sell and implement Upstream as a standalone solution for brokers, and we provide the tech stack that supports that.
All right, thank you, Amy.
Alex.
And of course, we have Victor.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, nice to be here. Thanks for having me, Alex. You know, I was part of the Upstream project with Wave Group when it was ideated originally. So I've been helping brokers kind of ideate around what this is and understanding a lot of the pain points that brokers and franchise organizations have around data collection, storage, and distribution. So, you know, this is an enormous rethinking that allows brokers to not only have a better data quality, but also to have better control over their information and where it goes, and really allow them to seamlessly and easily manage their data across all the different vendor platforms that they use. So I'm excited for this new product release that you guys are set up for, and that's why, you know, as CEO of RE Technology, wanted to invite all the vendors who are on RE Technology to get a first look at what Upstream is doing and understand how that's going to be effective in helping them serve brokerages and agents in their business. So thank you very much for having me.
Awesome, outstanding. So just two quick admin pieces here. We are recording the webinar and we will make that recording available. Also, if you have questions, all participants are on mute. So it'd be a little hard with over 200 people registered. So everybody's on mute, but if you have questions that you want to ask, there's a chat window in your GoToWebinar panel. Feel free to enter them in as you go. We will watch them. Kim will be moderating, and anything that if we can answer it in flight, we will, or we may defer the question until towards the end of the Q&A section. It just depends on what the question is. And with that, let's get started. All right, so without getting into too much details, safe to say that most people are aware that Upstream has separated from our relationship with RPR and NAR. We needed to be a bit more independent, and we made a decision, and we looked back at our original RFP and the original vendors who had applied to our RFP. We also looked a bit outside, so there were a couple of vendors outside of the original set, but we ended up settling, and not even settling, we've been excitingly pairing up and partnering with CoreLogic. We felt that they were one of the best vendors that we could use, and they were the best vendor that had the breadth of experience in understanding MLSs, MLS technology, the data pieces of it, as well as the rules and the compliance issues. and they had the technology prowess to be able to develop quickly, because we wanted, because we were starting with a new vendor and basically starting over, we needed to go as fast as we could, but not do anything wrong. So we partnered with them, and we've been super excited about this relationship. And you'll see why as we go through the deck. So let's just reacquaint ourselves with what Upstream is and what it is not. As Victor had mentioned, it is a broker-driven initiative for brokerages to be able to better manage their data. Their data can be everything from prospect and contact information to transaction information, their firm records, and of course, their listings. So if you are a vendor who works with a broker's listings, especially if you are working, your product works with them almost at a transaction level or an individual listing level. So you can imagine if you're a marketing company, you might build single property websites, or you might do just list of postcards. If you're a transaction vendor, maybe think of like DocuSign or .loop or a back office system. You're working with those brokers, that broker's information, and at an individual transaction or listing level. We're perfect for that. If you would benefit from having better, deeper, or more high fidelity information, then Upstream would be great for you. When I say high fidelity, I mean, think marketing, for example. You want to get high resolution photos that aren't watermarked for print, we're perfect. That way the broker isn't re-uploading information to you every single time they want to print again. And we're excellent if you need access to a broker's data across regions. So you can imagine on some of the larger brokers, one I have in mind is in 42 separate MLSs. And if you need to get their information, you're either getting it from the broker, which many don't have technology teams or the ability to give you the data themselves. You'll end up now doing 42 different agreements across 42 different MLSs, doing 42 different pulls to even get their information. If that's the type of situation you're in, and you need to get a broker's data in a single pool across all of the geographies, then we're actually perfect for you again. Now, we are not designed to provide aggregate data. So if you're a vendor who needs all the listings in Boston to do whatever you do, whether you provide search capabilities like a agent website, or you provide like a CMA, Upstream is not the person you would go to. You would probably best served going to your MLS. All right.
Alex, I would add something there. I think for
Absolutely.
IDX vendors, for example, people that are, who need the entire MLS database in order to power like a search solution or a CMA or something like that, there's still a significant opportunity for connecting to Upstream, which I think you're going to get into later as it relates to roster data.
Absolutely.
I know that in your experience, you rolled out some enterprise level marketing solutions for some of the major franchises like Keller Williams and I think some of the Realogy brands and others. And I think the biggest timeline challenge that you faced at that time was related to onboarding the agent.
Onboarding and actually, I'm not sure offboarding is a word, but when an agent leaves. I was always surprised, regardless of who I worked with, especially if they were large, how often we did not know when an agent left the firm. But onboarding, absolutely. And one of the things I found is that, brokerages are really good. They have their sort of checklist for onboarding an agent, and it's a very manual process, but the organized ones, they go through a checklist. But as a vendor, I actually just had to wait until someone told us that, oh, I need a new person, so I need to provision a new CRM or a new instance of an agent website. And sometimes they send it to us in batch. Sometimes we get it, here and there. But when if that agent decided to leave, they changed brokerages and they left the firm, they don't really have checklists for exiting people. So we were never sure if someone was there or not. Maybe they're just an inactive agent. But then again, you know, especially when we're doing things like seat licenses, you kind of want to know who's on and who's off. And these are all kinds of scenarios that you can imagine get played out, especially from the vendor perspective, when you don't actually know who's coming on and who's coming off. Especially if you have a product that touches other members of a brokerage who aren't particularly agents. You can imagine with teams when you have transaction coordinators or listing coordinators who may not be an agent. So I can't use a roster that just talks about agents. I need to know who's in the firm. I need to know what offices they're in. I need to know something about the offices. Or you imagine a brokerage that, you know, grows through acquisition. It'd be nice to know when a brokerage buys a new office down the road, and I need to know their office information, their office demographics, who's in that office. You're onboarding 23 new people tomorrow. These are all things that would be interesting and beneficial for all parties if that data was a bit more transparent.
Excellent.
All right. So let's talk about deployment. Well, let's talk about how Upstream is different than other methods in which you can get listing information, other syndication tools. How is it different than working directly with the MLS? First of all, the brokers are the ones managing distribution access. So the brokers, and you'll see this a little bit later on in the presentation, they determine which vendors they want to manage using Upstream. So if I'm a brokerage and I distribute data to 15 different places, I could try to manage it all, or I can say, no, I'm only going to manage 5 of them, because those 5 are the ones that, there's my luxury print vendor, it's my postcard vendor, it's whatever it is that I care about managing. Higher res photos, I want to control what they're seeing or not seeing, versus everything. So they have the ability to change the configuration and change who and decide who they're going to manage and who they want their MLS to manage. We are also offering them multiple feeds. We call them payloads. So instead of there's just one bulk feed that has access to hundreds of fields and all the photos, a brokerage could decide, well, my transaction room doesn't really need access to photos. So I'll give them the full feed minus the media. Or in areas in which provide sales history, you can imagine them saying, well, this particular vendor doesn't need to have access to history, so I'll give them the feed minus the history. So there's a handful of feeds. Right now, they're really only the combination of full minus media, full minus history, and of course, you know, full minus media and history, if that makes sense. There might be other payloads later on as we grow and brokers have different requests, but we're starting off with just those basic, but those are really the key points. When brokers are concerned about giving access to all the data and just hoping that their just listed postcard vendor who only needs like 1 photo and 8 fields discards all the rest of the data, they can say, no, I'm only going to give you these pieces because you don't need sales history. So why am I giving you access to sales history? So that was sort of the point there. The brokers can give agents opt-in and opt-out. So I'm as a broker, I can say I'm going to integrate with Imprev and I'm going to let all of our data go to Imprev. But I'm also going to let the agents, if they don't want it to go there, opt out. And they can opt out or opt in at a listing level. So if I'm a brokerage that says I'm going to configure to go to XYZ vendor or portal or whoever, and I'm going to configure it that by default, we don't send the data, but if the agent needs to, because their seller client says, no, I want you to do this, the agent can opt in. Now, this is still under the broker's control. So the broker can say, you absolutely don't have a choice to syndicate. You absolutely don't have a choice that we're not going to do it, or I give you opt-in or opt-out. But once it's configured, then they have that flexibility. The next thing is, over time, the broker can schedule distribution. Not every single vendor needs every single piece of information in real time. My commission system in the back end doesn't need real time every single time a listing pops in live. Again, they'll have access to high fidelity assets. So we are allowing the broker to not only upload high resolution, non-watermarked photos, branded and or unbranded video. Over time, we'll allow them to attach documents. So you imagine things like an HOA PDF needs to go to the transaction room, so they can attach these things to listings and push that out. And over time, we'll allow them to even extend the schema, simply meaning that we'll give them a handful of fields that are of their use. They can label them how they want. They'll probably be very generic types, but maybe I'm a broker who has mortgage and title, and I need to attach the escrow officer's information, name, rank, serial number, etc., to that listing, because that's what needs to get pushed to my transaction room or my back office system. They will be able to extend that and extend that as part of their distribution. And again, we talked about this already, but vendors can access all the broker's data across all the regions in a single call. In fact, you could, if you had 50 brokers on the platform, you could go across all 50 brokers against all their regions with that single call.
Alex, this is Victor.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that that I know there's quite a few vendors that have solutions that help brokers with things like ordering photography, ordering sign service, preparing flyers before a listing goes public, to go and show it to the seller, make sure they're happy, things like that. So anybody that triggers these types of pre-listing activities for the brokerage can rely upon Upstream for that information.
Absolutely, that's absolutely true. Thanks. As we mentioned earlier, we're going to give all vendors the ability to pull firm record information, and I'll have a slide later on to kind of get into the details, so I'll skip over that for now, but we'll come back to it. And just as a reminder, the agreements are between you, the vendor, and the brokerage. So again, if that brokerage is in 42 MLSs, you need to pull across. It's just, that's the agreement between the broker giving you their data. So it's between you and the broker. There aren't 42 more agreements. There isn't technically an agreement about the data between even Upstream and the vendor. There is an agreement between Upstream and vendors, but it's more like SLAs, our guarantee of uptime, when we'll notify you of maintenance windows, things like that. And I think one of the most important pieces for vendors is access is free. The brokers are the ones who initiated the project, who are funding the project. So they pay. They pay to have this sort of dashboard control mechanism. Vendors, you have an agreement with the broker wants to distribute the data this way to you, great. There's no access charge, there's no fee for you, not a one-time fee, not an anytime fee. All right, so let's talk about deployment. We sort of wrapped up deployment and themes, and again, it was very important for us to get out fast. The brokers have been waiting a long time for the product. Admittedly, we had some missteps along the way when we first were launching. We learned from all of that and redeployed all of our knowledge into a rapid deployment sort of theme-based project plan, and fortunately partnered with probably the best vendor I could have ever asked for. CoreLogic immediately put multiple teams assigned to us, and we worked on multiple phases concurrently to make sure we could go as fast and as quickly as possible. So phase 1, or phase 0 actually, was let's get this thing out and deploy it fast. And we'll show what's in the phases. Phase 0 is live today. Phase 1, add key critical features, of course. And when we launch phase 1, which I'll show you will be in the summer, phase 1 is when we will start rolling up and deploying to all of the all the brokerages who've already signed. And you'll see on the next slide that we have approximately, we're approaching 250,000 agents worth of brokerages that have signed contracts with us. Phase 2, we're gonna add deeper team and role-based security. And of course, CoreLogic and Clarity have very deep knowledge and experience dealing with role-based features. But we wanted to definitely emphasize on things about teams, especially for marketing. You can imagine there are teams out there who have a sort of a command and control infrastructure, and that's my words, And some are also just sort of a little looser, maybe husband and wife teams. But there are ones that if you're part of the Alex Lang team, all marketing needs to say Alex Lang team, not Kim Mellick agent. And we're able to push that, and you can distribute that data to understand the team concept and how the team should be marketed across the board. Phase 3, if you have been familiar with the project, we will start developing and deploying what we originally referred to as direct input. This is the system in which the agent would enter the listing into Upstream first. Now, the way we're planning on deploying that is, I think the easiest way to actually describe it is, imagine if you're in a CoreLogic market. Now, CoreLogic has well over 60% of the footprint. We're going to update and refresh the interface and bring all of these broker-driven distribution tools that we mentioned in the earlier phases into that MLS platform. So the agent still logs onto the MLS. They still go in, they're still part of the MLS ecosystem. It's just sort of bringing these distribution features and bringing sort of an updated interface. And then long-term, at some point, what we want to do is be able to peel off that interface and make it, give it the ability through RESO standards and the RESO web API to become a detached add edit module that other MLSs, non-CoreLogic MLSs, may use. So the goal for the broker is, I'm in 42 MLSs. Do I have to have 7 different training modules across because all of our interfaces are different? Or can we have one single looking interface so you only trade an agent once? Especially in those really tightly clustered locations where a listing might be in multiple MLSs at once. That's the longer term goal there. And of course, phase 5 is really far away, but that's when we're going to start bringing back from the original RFP, there was all different types of brokerage data that they wanted to manage. Of course, we talked about listings, and this has been the core of it. Roster and firm record information, super important. But eventually, we want to start looking at things like clients and past transaction history. And where do I store that in the cloud? And how do I get some nimbleness if I'm going to move from one vendor to another? So we haven't even technically started doing requirements gathering. We have ideas of what these are, but that is far out. But I wanted to just give you, so this is the direction where we're going. All right, so let's talk about just in the first couple of features, what's happening right now. So again, phase 0 is live. We're using this as a test. If you want to have a little bit more about that, I did recently post an article on the Upstream blog that sort of talked about the relationship with CoreLogic, but it also talked about the test. And so in phase 0, we're doing a white label of, if you're familiar with Trestle, it looks similar, except there are features that aren't in Trestle. And what we'll be doing there is giving a broker version of it. Brokers will be able to manage distribution using those templates we talked about. They'll have dashboards with very specific vendor controls, turn them off, turn them on, give me some insight, and when's the last time they accessed the data, if there was any errors, etc. It is not agent-centric yet. There is no listing enhancement, so this is a pure, I'm setting up a vendor, I'm going to distribute to that vendor, I'm going to control the payload, but there isn't any enhancements in phase 0. The broker can add administrative accounts, because you can imagine how many actual broker owners are going to go in and manage their distribution. They're probably going to give it to an office manager or a GM, if you will. Now, phase 0 again is live. We're doing our tests. I wanted to test a handful of things before we put our foot on the gas pedal as far as deployment. One test, I wanted to make sure that a broker who has a tech department can easily integrate with the API for an internal system. For your vendors, you guys are all pros at this and you consume data all the time, but we have brokerages who have internal systems that they want to get their data back as well, and we just want to make sure that it works very well and clean for them and it's not hard, and so we wanted to figure out if there's any friction points. The next test is, of course, we are going across multiple markets and our brokers span the US. So can I pull from a CoreLogic market, a non-CoreLogic market across multiple regions in one pool at the same time. So just make sure there's no friction there. That was very important to us. And of course, as a vendor, I wanted to make sure that can we pull across all of our brokers that are on the platform, across all their locations, and just work through any kinks. So that's what phase 0 is. We're actually working currently with one of the brokers. In fact, he's our chairman. It's Real Estate One out of Detroit. We're pairing up with both Real Comp and Ann Arbor, and we're running these tests now. And Dan does have technical staff with internally written systems. In fact, they usually manage their own distribution, so they were a good guinea pig for us, and we are running through those tests as we speak. All right, so phase 1, summer. This is when we fire up the enhancing the listings, letting them load all of these high-res photos and high-resolution assets. We ran this project is running in parallel. Had to be. I mean, I'm sure as a vendor, you understand the magnitude of the platform deployment needed to be able to allow people to load a ton of high-resolution photos for across all of their assets, across all the brokers, across the entire US. So you can imagine, CDNs and web services that have to be deployed and tested. So all that's being put in place and has been running in parallel. This is when that scheduling tool is put in, and also the roster feed. So this is like the meat of it. This is where people now will be able to pull all this information across the board and let the brokers on. So once we launch in summer, then we will be taking all of the brokers that have signed up, and we are just going to heads down start deploying. So phase 2 is we're targeting the end of fall. And this is where now the broker can add the agent account. The agent can come on board and upload their photos themselves, etc. We'll have that role-based entitlement. This is that part where I said the agent can opt in or opt out. And of course, team listing attribution. Remember I said like the Alex Lang team. I wanted to go to the marketing, the postcard vendor as the Alex Lang team, not Kim, who's the actual agent in the MLS listing. And then phase 3 will go quiet. Now this is probably not Q1, we should probably make that Q2 to be comfortable. But what we're doing is we're gonna go a little dark. The Upstream team will be going through and like deploying across the US in this broker direct feeds model. But the CoreLogic team will be in the background, and they're gonna be building that new direct input module. And then we'll start trying to launch that probably in Q2 of 2020. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the firm record. We've touched on it a bit throughout this presentation, but I think it's important to understand like what's in there. So think about offices. I'm Pac Union, well now Compass, right? And I've been Mark McLaughlin, and I am buying up offices all over the state of California. What are the office locations? What is the information? Does the office have a photo? Do you have a description for the office? Then I need to know how many people are in the office. Of those people, how many are in teams? These are the kind of the office roster firm record information you'll be able to get. Of course, the team, who's in a team? How should they be designated as in marketed? When someone pops in or pops out, imagine I'm an agent, I have 15 listings. I join the Ben Kenny team. Do all 15 of my existing listings now need to be updated to have the attribution of the Ben Kenny team? Maybe yes, maybe no, but that ability needs to be there. Agents, of course, that's pretty standard, except think about it. When in its fruition, over time, you can imagine an environment where how many places does an agent's profile get distributed? How many photos do they have? And they have their standard profile, they might have a luxury profile, they may have other kinds of profiles, and every website out there who has an agent sort of headshot profile, what if there was an easy way for them to make one update and it goes across all the way, right? That'd be awesome for them. And of course, staff. Listing coordinators, transaction coordinators. With the advent of teams, there are a lot of people working on listings that aren't necessarily agents. They're not the ones selling, they're not the one closing, not the one contracting, but they might be enhancing it, they might be uploading the photos, they might be, once it goes into docs, they might be involved, So there are definitely tools and technologies that care about those people and need to know them and need to know their seats and need to know who they are and need to know how they contact them. So when we say firm record, it's not just simply agent rosters. It's actually much deeper than that. And of course, long-term, a question that has come up is how is this different than the MLS rosters? Well, I think I just went over how it's different from an expanse perspective, but you can also imagine that if you have a partnership with a brokerage and maybe your partnership, and I'll use that same example I did before when I was at Market Leader, we had, very, very large deployment across Keller Williams, and we needed to know every single time a new agent came on, we needed to provision them a CRM. We needed to set up their agent website. We needed to have someone help them concierge upload their contacts. So to have that notifier and not having a manual thing was a great, great piece of technology that we implemented when we did that deployment, but it was very specific to just Market Leader and specific to just Keller Williams. So you can imagine as a vendor, if I had that across all of my brokerages, that would have been awesome.
And I think that's one of the big universal benefits of Upstream that we really don't see in the marketplace today at all. That's a pure differentiator for the brokerage, and brokers really get this. Your broker website, if you have an office manager, that's not data that's available anywhere else. And you may want to provision products and services or maybe statistical reports or things like that to office managers with your product, but you don't have a record in order to distribute that on behalf of the broker. So a lot of technology companies are building their own roster management tool, but that roster management tool doesn't connect to other business tools that are in the brokerage. So the brokerage ends up inserting a firm record in every one of their technology products for an admin or for an office manager or for people who have discretionary control over software and how it's being used and deployed in their local market area. That needs to be, that gets managed from one location with Upstream versus many locations as it is today. I know that, Amy, you have some interesting perspective on the roster management of between associations and MLSs and how that relates to data feeds from an MLS today. Sure. You want to talk a little bit about how Upstream can help sort some of that out?
Sure. Well, I think the important thing to understand as technology providers, and most of you are probably painfully aware of this, is that the agent and office information that comes via Reds feed from the MLS is really aggregated and designed to meet the needs of the MLS and association. So it's more around, do we have the right billing information and things like that. There's many MLSs that probably obviously support a photo, relying on the agent to upload that, or things like that. And so a roster set that's designed for billing information can be kind of subpar to a brokerage's roster information that's designed specifically for marketing purposes. And so I would say even, and this is true of the enhanced photos and everything, even if you're getting the aggregate set of listing data to use to power a website, for example, there's benefits to using the Upstream the Upstream individual brokerage data to get things like an enhanced roster and better photos. So, I want to make sure that everyone understands that while delivery is via a similar technology, the API, you can connect via the web API or via RETS. The difference is the data set that you're getting. And so I could foresee vendors who actually might use Trestle or another MLS feed to get the listing data, but use Upstream to enhance the individual brokers that they're serving and make that a better experience with less effort.
Well, that just queued up a new question from John, and I guess Amy, you might as well just get ready to answer this one as well. Will data go into Trestle if I'm not a Trestle subscriber, but I am a subscriber on Upstream?
It will not. It will not go into Trestle. So Upstream is a standalone system. While it does use a lot of the same features. We took the code base for Trestle as our starting point for Upstream. It's a separate approval and provisioning process. Only data that brokers have signed off on and that Upstream has a license from the MLS to use will be moved into Upstream. None of it will go backwards to Trestle.
Perfect, thank you. Just as a reminder, if any of you have any additional questions, so use that chat window and type them in. All right, so let's give just a really quick account for the broker, especially in phase 1. It's really straightforward. We've been focused on trying to, again, reduce friction of the broker process to give them these capabilities. So the broker will literally just sign up, and it's self-serve. They can sign up to Upstream, they can create their account, enter their billing information, etc. They then go to configure their MLS. So when they do that, they open up, look for their MLS in our list of integrated MLSs. If they're there, they pick it and then they enter their MLS broker ID for verification. If their MLS has not been integrated with us yet, then they can enter in that information and we will get notified, and then we start hustling and getting that next MLS on board. But again, we have a lot of them integrated. CoreLogic markets are already pretty much done because we're working with CoreLogic, and we know the mapping there. They then turn around and add their vendors. So I pick my MLS and I pick Imprev or Back Agent or whoever, and then I determine which payload that they should be getting. I want Imprev to get the full payload. I want Back Agent to get full payload minus media or whoever, and I made that up. That might not be appropriate, but you get the point. They'll be able to set up at that moment the scheduling. When should they get the listing? Real time with a delay, and they'll determine that. And then they sort of set it and forget it. And just as a reminder, again, once phase 1 deploys, we will be aggressively going across the country, MLS by MLS, because we have signed contracts with brokerages that cover almost 20% of the market, depending on how you look at it, whether they're realtors or registered agents, but they cover about 250,000 agents. So what does that mean for you as a vendor? Well, you'll receive an invitation from us to connect or sign up. We'll give you, there's a place you can sign up, you'll see at the end of the deck, where you say, I want to integrate, and let's go. Well, then you'll receive credentials and access to the API documentation. You configure and test. And then every single time a broker goes through the process and picks you, you'll get notified. So we use that sort of cycle as the notification of, oh, the Alex Lang team is now using Upstream, and they added you as one of their integration partners. So hello, time for you to start pulling data from there. Now, what's really nice about this is now you're being exposed to every single participating broker in a directory. When we integrate with you, I'm going to ask you for a couple things. I'm going to ask you for a logo, maybe a little marketing blurb that you might want to have. We'll create a giant directory categorized by your type of vendor you are. And you might be in multiple categories because maybe you're CRM and a website provider, et cetera. Think about how it's done on RE technologies, kind of similar as the brokers come on board. So if I'm a broker and I'm working with a postcard vendor and I suddenly want to change, it's really easy for me to look at those vendors in the Upstream directory, see the ones that are already integrated, and just go ahead, and the switching is as easy as them to saying that they want to use a different vendor or an additional vendor. If you're not integrated and the broker wants you, same sort of process like the MLS. They'll put your information in, we'll get notified, and then we will extend an invitation to you and say, you know, Howard Hanna is using the services. They want you to start pulling their data from Upstream, and here's what we need to do to get connected. And that's how the process will work. You'll be notified every single time a broker signs up and adds you. You'll be notified if they take you off.
You know, I think a lot of vendors are going to work with this information pretty creatively. They'll be able to brokers will be able to provision a data feed to a vendor and then experience a demonstration of a vendor's product with their data in it for the first time. You know, you'll be able to do that, and that's a pretty exciting thing, as well as, you know, the opportunity to just launch immediately with a launch your product into a brokerage immediately, regardless of the size of the brokerage. So whether you're dealing with a 10 agent firm or a 10,000 agent firm, you can hydrate the information that you need to build the accounts in your software out of Upstream in near real time.
Perfect, thanks. All right, so let's just talk tech really quick. Many of you who are on the call are currently Trestle technology providers, TPs as they call it. Many of you are not. So what's the difference? What does it matter? How does it work, etc.? So let's go over that really quick. If you're a current Trestle technology provider, the integration looks virtually the same as what you've already done. Now, of course, you'll have different credentials and a different API endpoint if you're using the APIs, but that's pretty much it. So the code that you wrote to do that initial integration, you're pretty much just going to reuse it, or, you know, just branch it off, but you get the point. It's the same, basically the same type of integration as if you already have it, and with just different credentials because the data is going to a different data store. The Upstream full feed, if you're a technology provider today, is very similar to what Trestle calls the IDX Plus. And you can imagine IDX Plus minus media or IDX Plus minus history, but that's pretty much the same. Now, if you're new to this environment, you can select either connecting to Upstream through a RESO data feed or through a RETS data feed. The way a lot of the vendors, you guys are already familiar with RETS and you've been doing it for years. It was not conducive to velocity to say we're only going to do RESO Web API. Now, to be clear, over time, I have full intent to retire RETS access at some point because the whole world is trying to move to using RESO Web API. But for now, I've got to be able to serve everybody, so both are there. The Web API is a RESTful API, as you know. It is a RESO standard based on the 1.02 specification and OData 4.0. The RETS API is the API that's based on RETS 1.8 specification. Most of you are already familiar with that. So you can choose which one you're going to use today.
I think RETS 1.8, Amy, isn't that the latest and final RETS specification?
Correct. Also worth noting that all of this data is arriving in data dictionary compliant format. So further promoting the RESO standard, it's, you know, Alex has been describing the transport protocols, kind of how you transport the data for use, but the data dictionary format standardizes the data and demonstrates a lot of efficiencies over time in onboarding new vendors because the metadata doesn't change. So that's important to point out, as well as that all of this is data dictionary compliant as well as Web API.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Amy and Victor.
Yeah, and that's the full data set, right, Amy? So like, I know I spoke to a virtual tour vendor, Randall Standard. I think he's on the call today. But you know, he provides like a texting service where a consumer can text a phone number that's on a yard sign and get the listing details. So Randy wouldn't need to go get an MLS data feed. He could just, you know, power his product through Upstream, right?
Correct.
Awesome. All right, let's go on to next steps. So as a vendor, this is the perspective as a vendor, deployment planning. So you might want to look at your existing agreements, how you're pulling and leveraging a broker's data today, and if there's any stipulations in them. Again, Upstream just looks like a product that the broker has purchased, and if they're using it in-house and providing you their data, their back office data, through technology. So it's pretty straightforward, but you know, it's always safer to check and make sure that everybody is doing the right thing. Plan any required resources if you need to do an integration. If it's brand new to you, you know, just make sure you have the resources to do it. The integrations go quickly. It's not too difficult. I've seen many people do it, and the existing Trestle integrations are well known. But it's always better to sign up for it, and when the broker asks for it, and especially the larger brokers are pushing on you, saying, let's do it, let's do it, let's do it, and all of a sudden, you know, 1, 2, 3, you have to go. So just you want to think about that, and of course, sign up for access today, just so we can go ahead and get a lot of this paperwork out of the way and get your credentials, etc. From the configuration standpoint, you know, obviously you complete the integration, but you want to consider things like duplications. Right? If you are, I mean, the broker will go in, and if they decide they want you to get their data via Upstream versus the way you get it today, we work with them to go into their MLS per se, and maybe turn that data distribution off. But you can imagine a scenario, especially in self-serve, where people aren't really doing it well. There might be a situation where you'll get both. You might be a vendor who needs both for a variety of reasons, and you just need to be able to handle, like, I mean, the IDs fortunately will be the same, your MLS IDs, so you'll be able to see them, but you might want to just take an account for, one, will we get duplicate records? 2, is there, which record wins over the last? Should it be Upstream? Right, and then technically I would imagine it would be, mostly because the data is identically the same. They're not allowed to edit the data, except the photos might be richer and there might be additional fields. And of course, you want to consider how you would handle unsolicited signups. I'm a broker. I configure my MLS. I then look at all the vendors that are there. And I go, oh, look, Back Agent's there, or Imprev's there, or whoever's there. I want to work with them, and click. But you guys don't have a relationship yet. You'll get notified. Do you need to, like, think about the internal routing? Like, ooh, salesperson needs to pick up the phone and call these guys. That's the kind of thing you might want to consider, right? But of course, in deploying, we'll notify you again when brokers are live. We're going to notify you whenever somebody signs you up. You'll get those notifications. And we, of course, we want to insert you into the directory so that you have, regardless of whether you currently have a relationship. So think about, what's that, like, little bit of a marketing snippet that you want to give me? Which logo do we need to send them? And let's get that stuff put together so that we can start giving you a little bit more, giving you the exposure to the brokers who are on the platform. All right. So we're going to go into Q&A here in a minute, but let's just, we'll close this out before we go to QA to say, like I said, go to upstream.com. There's a sign up logo for you. A sign up menu item. Just go in, pick the vendor, put your information in, and that way we'll get you queued up. If you've done this already in the last time when we were still in the RPR world, we do still have that information. Doesn't hurt to sign up again, doesn't do anything different, but I just want to make sure that we've caught everybody, and then we will start managing getting you documentation, access, credentials, etc. All right, so Kim, let's talk about some Q&A since we're already here, approaching the top of the hour.
And Alex, do you want to keep the recording going during the Q&A session?
Sure, absolutely.
All right.
So a couple of people just doing some questions saying they didn't hear. I'm assuming that people have. It might have been early on. Oh, it's probably early on when we first started. Yep. Information we could use here. Let's maximize the screen or stretch it down.
So with the questions from Bergeron, he put in one question and then he broke them up into a bunch of tiny questions.
Yes.
So thank you, Russ.
Right.
You're always an inquisitor.
Yes. All right. So here we go. Post an Upstream sent to which brokers are members of Upstream? Like I said, we have brokerages across the country that represent almost 250,000 agents. We have sort of master agreements with people like home services for all of their agents. We have agreements with basically everybody in the Realty Alliance. A lot of the leading RE companies. It's not one of the things that we typically do. Of course, it's a contract between Upstream and the broker, so it's not one of those things you'd publish. It's like me asking you, give me every single client you have. But it's pretty broad swath, and you can imagine the people, if you look at our board of directors and their coverage, right? So you've got Keller Williams, you've got Remax, you've got leading RE, you've got the Realty Alliance, and you've got some fairly large large brokerages in there, and large franchises who have signed contracts, for instance, Berkshire Home Services, all the corporate are wrapped in, but not necessarily all of the franchisees are. But as we deploy, that's when the sales, let's call it the sales machine, kicks in again, and we'll be aggressively going after everyone else who's not there. All right, so let's see, which MLSs is each broker a member of? So again, they are spanned across the entire country, and as we deploy them, we will make sure we have integration with each of the MLSs. MLS names. So you'll be able to see the questions we have is about, it's really specific about, okay, once you're integrated, will I know what MLSs they're in, how many listings they have, et cetera, and you'd be able to see that from the API. Multi-party contracts. So the question is whether or not we have multi-party contracts. There is a contract between the MLS and Upstream, and again, this has to do mostly with SLAs, etc. There's a contract between the vendors, the integrated vendors, and Upstream, same thing. There's a lot of new with this confidentiality, SLAs, etc. And most importantly, there's a contract there's your normal vendor contract you have today. If you were working with Howard Hanna and getting their back office feed for any reason, I'm assuming you already have a contract. That contract's between the vendor and the broker. And of course, there is the standing contract, which basically every single MLS has, which is a back office feed agreement between the MLS and the broker.
So when a vendor is onboarding a broker and they're an Upstream participating firm, how does the contract get initiated by? Does it get initiated by the broker, or does it get initiated by the vendor, or can it go either way? How does the e-contract work that allows the data to be provisioned? So
again, the broker, the minute they sign up for Upstream, there is a contract that is validated, and some of the vendors we have, like for instance, Real Estate One in Ann Arbor, they already have a back office feed contract. We're just going ahead and starting a new one just to keep everything clean, and then we have to try to reconcile. But when the broker signs up, they configure their MLS, then there's a process that ensures that that back office agreement, that data feed agreement between the MLS and the broker is in place. And then the broker signs the vendor up. And then it initiates whether the broker's already on or not. They certify whether they have an agreement already in place with that vendor. And if not, then we chase it down and just make sure that they have an agreement. I can't imagine a vendor not having some sort of sales contract or an agreement with the broker before they start getting a broker's data. But the broker's the one who onboards the vendor, not the other way around.
So it's a pretty good idea for vendors to have an agreement regarding data that might be different from your sales agreement. And if you have one that you're going to use for any broker that's that's participating in Upstream, certainly that's not a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So next questions here. Can a broker modify their version of the Upstream data to include data elements to be used only by that broker for their listing? Again, so the data in the configuration, it is the MLS information that comes by. That's read only. They can't edit. If they want to update any of that information about the listing, they need to go back in their MLS and do that. This is a distribution tool. Now they can enhance the photos, and they opt. Do I want to send the photos we got from the MLS, or do we want to send our photos instead? And our photos just means the high-res version, maybe more than what the MLS can support. at some point, we're going to extend the data and let them have some additional fields that don't exist. And I talked about the mortgage or the escrow title kind of fields that they might want to add on. Those they will be able to add on, and there will be probably a payload that says that those can go with it. But those aren't information in MLS. The MLS data is static, it's clean. And we're only letting them control the distribution. They can't edit, so they can't update price, they can't update anything about that listing unless they go back to the MLS, because it needs to stay true and clean there.
Alex, I have a follow-on question to that.
Sure.
Will the description text be editable? I know that years ago in San Diego, the MLS added a listing syndication field, and they were one of the few MLSs that allowed brokers to put in text, a description text for listing syndication that was different from text that's appropriate for IDX. You know, it's sort of more marketing focused than an IDX description. Is that going to be in phase 1?
No. The photos will potentially have their own descriptions that may or may not exist in the MLS. Like imagine it's a detailed description of that kitchen, but not the primary. The descriptor that's the primary description of that listing is coming from the MLS itself. It is not going to be separate in phase 1 or 2 for that matter. So question about compliance. If a vendor offers websites, who does the compliance checking? It's the same as it is today, right? So a broker, again, I mean, a vendor that offers websites today, probably, I can't imagine it's very appropriate for them to use Upstream because they can't get the aggregate data. They can't get like all the listings in San Francisco. They'd still want to use your standard 3-way IDX agreement and feed. Now, if you're a single property website provider, and that is only the only listing or the only web page, then they can get the data from Upstream, and that there isn't an MLS compliance check on that, because it wouldn't be any different than if the broker just handed the data themselves to that single property website provider. Otherwise, it's the same. I mean, I can't imagine a scenario, but it would be very hard to implement well from a product perspective. But you can imagine a scenario where I'm a website provider, agent websites, and I'm pulling MLS data, and we all know you can't commingle. So search results, property detail pages, it's all IDX. It follows the same compliance things that exist today. But a lot of these websites also on their homepage have my featured listings. It's my 3 listings that I have. And that goes to its own thing. And that data potentially could be Upstream only data, not commingled. But again, you have to try to design that so it's a consistent, clean interface experience for the consumer. Hard to pull off. I mean, I'm sure there are designers who can do it, but I think we're a bit away from that, and I think we'll cross that bridge. And of course, and I have full faith that the MLSs will take a look at the stuff and go, okay, where does that come from? What does that come from? And they'll have their own decisions, rules, and opinions about it. But it probably won't change too much from where it is today. So Russ, we've got a lot of questions, and some of them are pretty deep to try to do on a call, but I promise you I will answer them, and we'll definitely put them in a Word document and go from there. So let me look for some of the quicker ones since we're running out of time, but I promise again, I will put all of them because they're really, really strong questions and good ones to answer publicly here. If a vendor already has an MLS data license directly through Trestle, why would you need to use Upstream for that MLS? Because again, the data that you could be getting from Upstream is richer, extended, more high fidelity. So if you already get data from Trestle and you want to just get the standard feed that you're getting today, you theoretically don't need to, except that the broker might turn around and tell you as the vendor, I need you to do it from Upstream because I want to manage the payload. I want to manage the timing. I want to manage it, and I'm going to turn it off. And they will just turn it off in the MLS, to be clear.
I think the bigger reality there is getting that firm record, so you can hydrate your applications with the identities of the agents, teams, firms, and offices and things like that, which isn't in the data.
So there's a question about rollout, and will priority be given to CoreLogic MLS customers? Not necessarily. I mean, that's not a default. That's not how we're driving it. We're driving it by the brokers who have signed contracts with us and what markets they're in. And will I go, hey, I've got 25 customers in Arizona MLS and we're already integrated, so let's just push them live? Maybe. But again, the MLS only integrates once. And then I can just go ahead and bring on board those brokers. So there'll be a multifaceted aspect of this. But trust me, when if you look at my board and had the size of some of these brokerages, they're going across all kinds of MLSs. And sometimes it might feel a little slower or feel like a priority because let's just say I'm a broker in 13 MLSs, only 6 of them are CoreLogic. Those other 7, we still need to map those MLSs, and that takes work. Not a lot, but it does take work, and it will slow the implementation down. So it might feel that way, but it's not prioritized that way. That is not the intent, and it is not the directive. Okay, let's go down. Seems like a lot of work, broker to make decide which data goes to which vendor. So the question is, it seems like a lot of work for brokers to make the decision of which data goes to which vendor. It could be, depending on how many vendors they want to manage syndication to or not. We will more than likely default payloads. So if, again, you are a back office system or an e-signature system, the default might be simply full minus media, and the broker can certainly change it, and we'll let them know. I mean, but it'll be part of the interface, like, to be clear, that we've defaulted this to anytime it's not full as a default, we'll notify them. We'll let them know, probably on the screen or some messaging like, hey, just so you know, in the early stages, I mean, we're gonna manually work with them to bring it on board, just to look for these kind of things. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think it feel complicated. We're gonna do everything we can to give the broker sort of the easy button. All right. Will Trestle be charging vendor access? The answer is Trestles, and I can let Amy do this, but it's exactly the way it is today. If
Yeah.
Trestle charges you for access for full aggregate feed, that doesn't change.
Right. Trestle is complete independent system of Upstream. So I think it's really important that everybody sort of understand Trestle's managed by the MLSs. The MLS approves the feeds that come through Trestle, primarily today around IDX and BOW feeds. Upstream is that individual broker's listings only, and the broker's paying for that service. So while the API, the backend technology, the delivery protocols are the same, that's where the similarity ends. So just really important. So yes, if you're paying a fee for Trestle today, you'll continue to pay a fee.
There you go. All right, one question, and we talk about brokers all the time. Will there be a roll-up into franchisor data? The core tenet of Upstream from the very first day, and you think we have franchisers on our board, so there was a little bit of arm wrestling in the early days, is that the broker is the center of the universe. So if you looked at it as a hierarchy, the franchisor is not on top of the brokerage. It actually looks like a vendor. So a franchisee broker has the ability to manage their distribution. The franchisor has no influence on that whatsoever. Now, I can imagine a scenario where a franchisor would love to have access to the roster information across all of their franchisees. Now, of course, you got to imagine that all the franchisees have to be on Upstream before it's meaningful to them. But in that case, a franchisor looks like a vendor, just like everybody else. There is a question about, will each MLS have to have an agreement with Upstream? Absolutely. All right, scrolling down a little more, let's see what else we have here. And then again, all the other questions that have come through, we will make sure we answer in a document here. Let's see this one here. Since we already use Trusted for MLS feeds, I think we addressed, there was a question about if we already use Trusted for MLS feeds, are the APIs similar? The answer is yes. Will MLS, CoreLogic, or Upstream deny data for some vendors, even if a broker wishes to use them? No. The vendor, I mean, the feeds are the feeds, the payloads are the payloads. If a broker determines that they want to send you their data using one of this mechanism and using the payload, they can. It's their data. Neither Upstream nor an MLS can actually prevent that. I mean, because they could do it today. They could sum it up in a spreadsheet and send it to you if they wanted to. So yeah, no, it's not. That's not Upstream. Again, is a software tool. There's no controlling factors. There's no board of governance that manages who gets what. That's between the broker and the vendor. All right. I think where are we now? We're past the top of the hour. We're 8 minutes past. So we're going to go ahead and close up the Q&A section. But Amy, if you can scroll down. I mean, Kim, can you scroll down to the bottom really quick here? Just want to make sure there's nothing super pressing. The last piece is, does that mean a vendor has to pay the $75 a month for each broker they do business with? No, not if the vendor is working with Upstream, there is no fee for the vendor with Upstream. The fee structure for Trestle is different, but if you're a vendor who doesn't need aggregate data and you just want to get brokerage data and that broker's on Upstream, you connect with us. There is zero fee for a vendor. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close up the Q&A. Thank you, everybody. There's a lot of good questions in here, which I'm very excited about. So we are going to sum up these questions, and I'll pass it around to both Victor and Amy to make sure we answered them correctly. And then I think Victor will distribute them with slides once we button it all up. So expect to see that. But I appreciate all of your participation. We had a lot of people on this call, which was great. And hopefully you got the information. And remember, go to upstream.com, go to sign up, and go ahead and sign up as a vendor, and so we can start the process for you, and we can get you some credentials and documentation. So again, with that, Amy, do you have any closing remarks? And Victor?
I'm not sure if Amy had to drop off or not, but no closing remarks. Thank you very much, Alex. I'm really excited about what Upstream is doing and the benefit that it's going to provide to make life easier for both brokerages and the vendors that support them. A lot of this data that Upstream is going to be managing is going to really repeal the requirement that every technology vendor has to create, sort of this environment for the firm record, which everybody's coding out differently. They're using different methods. It makes it really tricky to connect software between two different providers for seamless integration across the brokerage, and I really applaud the effort, and I'm amazed that you guys got it done. What I think you signed your agreement in November, and here it is June, and you're already at ground zero. So good job, well done. Thank you.
All right, everybody, thank you again, and just look for the messages from RE Technology regarding the collateral from the webinar. Again, thank you all.